Welcome back to the weekend here on Sports Radio 910. Your host for the weekend, Anthony Opperman. And on Tuesday night at the Richmond Times-Dispatch, there was a public square held to discuss what is baseball worth to the city of Richmond. Now, obviously, with myself being an employee of the Flying Squirrels, we have delved into the stadium topic a bit. Next hour, I want to get into it just a little bit more because there were certainly some things that stood out to me when I was in attendance on Tuesday night. But there's a guy that has certainly spent many more hours on this topic than I have even spent in Richmond total, and that's from the Richmond Times-Dispatch, Mr. John O'Connor. And John, first and foremost, thank you so much for taking the time this morning.
My pleasure, Anthony. It's always good to be on the weekend.
John, as a reporter sitting in the room on Tuesday night, what were some of your observations of the public square, and what would you say were some of the general themes that you kind of took away from that?
First off, I like the numbers. It's difficult to get people to come downtown on a Tuesday night for any reason. And to have a couple hundred people in that room, I think, was a good reflection on the interest in the subject. Second, I like the passion. People were very passionate about the way they spoke, most in favor of a new stadium, most in favor of the continued presence of minor league baseball in the city. Those are the two things that stood out to me, Anthony, and I think that's a very encouraging sign for supporters of baseball in the area.
John O'Connor from the Richmond Times-Dispatch joined us this morning here on the weekend. And John, you mentioned the fact that there were mainly supporters of minor league baseball in a new facility in Richmond, and that was one observation that was pointed out by Tom Silvestri, who was moderating the public square, and he kind of presented the question to everybody there as to why they felt like there was such a strong showing of support for a new stadium. And really, when you look at it in terms of everybody who spoke that night, really there was only one person that spoke against spending tax dollars and public money on a new baseball stadium. When you compare that to the message boards and some of the other things that you may read online in the comments to stories about this issue online, I want to pose that question to you. Why do you think there was such a difference in that regard?
Anthony, I think I go back to the passion part of it. Passionate people are motivated, and they get out, and they do things, and they are interested in supporting things locally. And so I think that's what you got, is the passionate edge of the group that really supports baseball in the city. Their presence was obvious on Tuesday night. The other part of it is I'm not sure anybody's against the stadium. People are very, very interested in knowing how that stadium's going to be paid for, and we haven't heard the details of that. So on the other side of the coin, it's fairly easy to say, I don't want my tax dollars to go to a stadium, but nobody's really sure about the financing plan. So it's difficult to come out and start criticizing the possibility of a new ballpark if you don't know how it's going to be paid for and how it's going to affect you. So perhaps the proponents of a new ballpark, it's easier for them to speak at this time.
John O'Connor from the Richmond Times-Dispatch speaking on the public square that was held at the Times-Dispatch building on Tuesday night, in which it was discussed what is baseball worth to the city of Richmond. And, you know, John, you do bring up the financing, and like you said, there hasn't been a lot of information released at this time as to how a ballpark would be financed. The city of Richmond has come up with a plan for its share, thanks to the money that was received by the city from the RMA payback. But even though we haven't gotten anything locally here, as you've been covering this story and comparing this story to other baseball stadium situations in other areas, how do other municipalities go about it? Where did this money come from in their budgets?
In general, it's a mixture of public and private funds, and the thing that complicates it in the Richmond area, Anthony, is that we have different jurisdictions that will be expected to pitch in. That's not the usual situation. You usually have a city or a county that sort of takes the bull by the horns and runs the show and collects the financing pieces. Here, we are missing sort of a ringmaster in that regard. We don't have anybody that's in charge of organizing our different area jurisdictions in this regard, and perhaps that's and it's really a weak spot of this whole process. When the diamond was built, we had a couple of local leaders who very much were at the front of the pack in terms of organizing the financing and encouraging private donations, and they were Bobby Ukrop and Dick Hollander. I know Bobby thinks that Bobby's still with us, and he thinks his race has been run in that regard, and he's done it once. He's not interested in doing it again. Dick Hollander passed away several years ago, so I think it would help the process significantly if we could have somebody step forward and say, I'm going to be in charge of this, and here's what I'd like the city to do, here's what I'd like the counties to do, and perhaps that would expedite the whole deal.
Do you think there's anybody who could potentially fill that role, John?
Haven't seen him or her yet. Don't know who it would be. That's as good an answer as I can give you. There's a void there. There's clearly a void there.
Fair enough. You know, the other thing that has been brought up, and I know in Virgil Hazlett's open editorial letter that he had published in the Times-Dispatch last Sunday, and then there was an economist who was at the public square on Tuesday night that brought it up at the very end. You know, Virgil referenced the 3 S's in safety, service, and schools. The economist brought up the fact that, you know, sometimes these projects are done out of capital improvement funds. That means money taken away from building new fire departments and new school buildings. How would this impact something like, say, education? I think that's the one thing, too, that seems to be a little misunderstood and misrepresented in the public is, does this actually take money away from schools? How much would it affect those kind of services that obviously are paramount to any local entity?
I haven't seen any plan that either of the counties, Enrico or Chesterfield, has advanced, so I couldn't tell you specifically where their contribution would come from. I will tell you this, in covering this stadium issue, the Diamond Stadium issue when it was built in 84 and 85, and other stadium issues, if you want to find a reason not to build it, you can always find a reason. There's always some sort of investment that can be viewed as far more important than a baseball stadium. Obviously, in these economic times, it's easier to find those sorts of things. And I would just say that let's do it right now if we're going to do it, because it's going to be cheaper right now. I was in contact with Peter Kirk with Opening Day Partners, and he's very active in the independent baseball leagues. And real soon they're going to be opening a new ballpark down in Sugar Land, Texas, and the original price on that was going to be around $50 million, and that was 5 or 6 years ago. And because of the economy, he's been able to work some deals and get it down to about 37. So maybe this is the time to strike, although it seems like an inopportune time. This may be the best time to go after a new ballpark.
John O'Connor from the Richmond Times-Dispatch talking about the public square that was held on Tuesday and the discussion, what was baseball worth to Richmond. And John, as you said Tuesday night, you've written a lot of words on the new ballpark topic. How does the current situation compare with the ballpark efforts in the past?
I'm sorry to say we're at about the same spot, Anthony. I've been doing this, writing about the subject for roughly 12 years. It was about in 2000 when the discussion began concerning the Diamond's situation and its inadequacies and the Braves' dissatisfaction with the ballpark. And every year it grew, and we all know now that in 2008, after that season, the Braves left. And we really should have seen it coming, because if you go back and read the Braves' comments, 2006, 2005, before that even, they were very, very, very worried about the ballpark situation here. And I think the only thing that stopped them from going earlier was another venue to play at, another city to move to. And when that came up with Gwinnett County down in Georgia, they got out of here fast. So we've been chewing on this rag in Richmond for a decade or more, and I'm sorry to say that the financing piece, which seems to be the obvious huge one, still hasn't been addressed.
John, just a couple more on this topic for you. I feel like education is paramount in making a decision like this, not only for the public, but I think also for the people who ultimately have to make the decision as to whether or not to spend money and where the money will come from and things of that nature. How educated do you think people are on the topic? How comfortable do you feel local politicians are on this issue when you have the chance to talk with them? Or is this a situation where they've kind of said, you know what, I don't even want to really delve into it too much because now is not the time?
I think that's part of it, the timing. And the other part of it is the Squirrels have done such a nice job renovating the Diamond and making the game day experience enjoyable that those who go to games find that the Diamond doesn't seem that bad to them. That's a compliment to the Squirrels, but the reality of the situation is if you really look at the place, it's substandard in dozens of areas compared to other stadiums, not just on the AA and AAA levels, but lower in the minor leagues as well. And it really doesn't give the Squirrels an opportunity to put on the best show possible. But the people who go to 3 or 4 games a year at the Diamond, they have fun. It doesn't seem to be falling down to them. The people are nice. The beer is cold. The hot dogs taste good. The entertainment is entertaining. And why in the heck do we need a new stadium? But eventually, we're going to need a new stadium. And I just warn people that those who do support baseball around here look around every corner for the next Gwinnett County, because we are a little skittish that minor league baseball and the Eastern League and the owners of the Squirrels will see a better opportunity elsewhere with a new stadium, greater revenue streams, and pull this team out. And I think that's what we all worry about in the Richmond area, those of us who care about baseball.
John, I want to bring this thing full circle before I let you go and before we end our discussion on the public square. You brought up right away one of the things that stood out to you in terms of a general theme on Tuesday night was the passion. Was there any one person that spoke and any one message that was delivered that really resonated with you?
I liked what Clay Meredith said. He's a fellow who spent about 4 or 5 years in the big leagues as a reliever and several minor league stops before then. He's from Meadowbrook High School and went to VCU. He talked about bringing his kids to the ballpark and how he was brought to the ballpark by his parents when he was younger in the area, and what a generational thing it is, and how important it is in his life and his kids' life to be able to sit up there in the upper deck and just sort of talk and look at the skyline and discuss baseball a little bit and everything else. And Clay also made the point, because he knows the business of the game, that we better watch out because that could disappear if we don't get a new stadium. And it could. It's happened before. Any of us who were here in 2008 know it can happen.
You know, it's funny you bring up Clay Meredith because I felt the same thing, and I'm going to talk about it a little bit later on in the second hour of this show. But, I mean, it was so refreshing. I mean, obviously Clay has made his living to this point in his life as a baseball player. He's been around the game in terms of being on the field, and you do have some interaction with the front office side, the business side of the industry, but just as heartfelt, I thought, as he could be and as passionate as he could be about not just the game of baseball, but the overall experience of baseball, and you could just tell, even though he's suffered injury, he got released by the Nationals, not bitter at the game, still very much feels strongly about the impact that can have on other people's lives.
Represented himself very well, as did Justin Verlander's dad, who brought a similar message. It's important. It's an important entertainment facet in the community. And again, it just connects generations, and that's not something many things can do.
John O'Connor from the Richmond Times-Dispatch speaking about the public square on Tuesday night. What does baseball mean to Richmond? John, I think we got our answer that night. Again, thank you so much for taking the time this morning. And, you know, if Jim Kelly doesn't pan out, please reserve November 17th on your calendar. I'd be honored to have you as the best man at my wedding.
I'm putting it down right now.
You're the best, John. Thank you.
Thanks for your help, Anthony. See you around.
John O'Connor, Richmond Times-Dispatch, join us here on the weekend. Stay tuned. We've got more coming up.
The Weekend with Anthony Opperman continues next on Sports Radio 910.